This is the cold, dark, sad abyss known as outer space. This is a UNSC research vessel that has just launched off of the planet, preparing to go out on some sort of, well, I take it, research mission. And this is us. We're space pirates, baby. Well, not yet. Technically, that's the ambition. First, we're going to need a ship. I suppose it's a good thing that we stowed away in the airlock of this research vessel. The only thing standing between us and our God-given destiny right now is the UNSC research crew and their filthy scout droid. Lucky for us, though, it just so happens that we might have a solution to this little problem. For you see, Pirate Captain Udo here is quite the charismatic lad. He and his boomstick, as it were. Not only that, but his compadre Zap Zap here and his combat knife will also do a little bit of talking. Oh, he'll stab you. He'll stab you real good. We exited the airlock and were immediately detected by the scout droid that was on board the research vessel. Zap Zap wasn't afraid of no Tin Man though, especially since he has his trusty plasma pistol. During this time, Captain Udo would try to flank the researchers and it went pretty good. That scout droid was still giving us a little bit of trouble though. Luckily, we would be able to team up on it, and eventually, after beating him senseless, we took him down. And just like that, we had commandeered this ship. Though, admittedly, we did take one hell of a beating during that little skirmish. We'll need to try and heal ourselves. Just as well, it would appear one of the crewmates didn't die from Zap Zap's barrage, so we'll begin healing him as well to take him prisoner. He might even make a good crew member for the pirates. Either way, we can't have a filthy vessel filled with the blood of our enemies. We're going to need to clean this place up a little bit. Part of that also means that we're going to be throwing corpses into the void of space. Luckily, Harper's EVA suit will come in handy here. Speaking of the crewmate named Harper, we would make a temporary brig here in their cryo sleep room and just kind of keep him there while we went to eat some delicious survival meals. After we finally filled up our tummies, we would actually go take a proper rest in the crew quarters. I can't tell you how long it's been since we've slept anywhere other than a cold, rainy street corner. After we were well rested, we had Zap Zap begin plotting out some new coordinates for us to travel to. As you could imagine, the planet below is absolutely crawling with the UNSC, so that's not exactly ideal. Something I noticed that also wasn't exactly ideal is there's only 2 cryosleep caskets, and if we were to make a slip space jump while Harper isn't in one, because, well, he's not going to be in one, he's going to end up dying most likely. So, of course, the only rational thing to do is to strip it from him so it's not tainted and we could wear it if we so choose after he dies. Just before getting into our cryopods and preparing for launch to a new planet, and now our journey truly begins. Well, that was much faster than we expected. It didn't seem like no time that we were in and out of those cryo sleep pods. And it would seem we have a brand new world beneath our feet. Just as expected, it would appear that Harper's cells and molecules and whatever else, DNA I suppose, were shoveled around like a jigsaw puzzle in a box, and yeah, it was probably a pretty violent death based on this. Whoopsie daisy. Our new planet appeared to be some type of Pangea with liquid water and green grass and trees and a breathable atmosphere, which was pretty great, but not only that, it also appears to be teeming with life, as you can see. So many factions. The ship's basic scanners were picking up signals from the Covenant, some Outlanders, the Shattered Empire, the UNSC, smorgasbords of pirates and insurrectionists. It was truly chaotic, which is exactly what we needed. Captain Udo was still a little bruised up from the previous battle with the crew of the ship, and on top of that, he also had some cryosleep sickness, but it was going away. As he was resting up, Zap Zap would begin planning out some coordinates to land on the planet. Now you might be saying to yourself, Rat Knight, a bunch of space pirates like yourselves, why would you dare land on such a chaotic and horrible planet? Well, my friends, where you see chaos and danger, we see a bunch of recruits just waiting to join us. And a place where the UNSC doesn't have total control. It might as well be the wild, wild west here on this gorgeous, beautiful, swampy jungle planet. There were, however, some Forerunner Sentinels that I noticed that were actually taking on flood spores, which would indicate to me that we had better watch where we step and also not mess with any Forerunner structures. Ah, finally some nice, fresh, natural air. It was also nice hearing and feeling the dirt crunch beneath our boots. You You'd be surprised what little things like that you miss when you're stuck on a spaceship. We've got no time to waste though. This planet is very dangerous and we're going to need to build some defenses. We immediately began cutting down some of the local vegetation here so that we could use the wood to build some barricades. Nothing too extravagant, of course, just a little something we threw together to keep the rabble-rousers at bay. Since we don't plan on taking off anytime soon, to conserve power, I decided to go throughout the ship turning off our computer core, our life support systems, and anything else that, well, used up power. This means we could divert that power into the temporary town and or base that we plan on building. I also built a nice little wooden horseshoe pin to kind of help keep their minds at bay, and we would definitely end up needing it as we immediately had a high psychic drone. Zap Zap was already getting to work on retrieving steel that we may need for electronics or any buildings, and Captain Udo was experiencing a brief spell of insane ramblings. To go along with our defensive perimeter in front of the airlock on the ship though, I thought about building some wooden posts with lights all around to ensure that any predators that were coming out of the jungle or pirates wouldn't be able to sneak up on us. But the only people that we found creeping around in the dark appeared to be some Outlander civilians. However, they were ambushed by a flood carrier form. This monstrosity burst forth with many infection forms coming out of it, even infecting one of the Outlanders who would turn on their friends. They ended up having to put him down, I'm afraid. I will say though that things could have been much worse. I watched them for a good time to ensure that no more of them were infected, and it didn't seem as if they were, or if they were, they had transformed after they left our territory, so we don't care. The very next morning, we decided to come out and begin collecting all their belongings for ourselves, so that was pretty cool. And since we're actually getting some items to our name, we thought it might also be a good idea to go ahead and build a small storage room, during which time we actually had the opportunity to name our settlement, and we ended up calling it Udo's Rock, as he is our captain. This also reminded me that we had yet to give our faction a name, so I decided to go with something that would strike fear into the heart of our enemies. We called ourselves the Torturous Marauders. I know, catchy, huh? Our rations were also beginning to get quite low, so this made me think that we should definitely go ahead and plant a small field of rice. Even though we have plenty of berries and wildlife, we still need a sustainable food source. But now the fun begins. We had a raid from the Knuckle Duster lineup, a small faction of pirates on this planet with a very silly name, it would seem. Literally as soon as I went to check out the group that was attacking us, I noticed they were getting bombarded with massive bullets. Turns out I forgot to turn off the ship's defense systems and they were just destroying the shit out of these pirates. Now you might hear that and think, damn Rat Knight, that's going to make raids very easy, and that is true, but I'm going to turn them off because they have very limited ammunition and there are going to be much larger and more powerful threats than a couple of pirates. Plus, the cannon's range is limited to the outer portions of the map, so once they get closer anyways, we can't really stop them with the cannons. The Planetary Defense Force, the Sentinels, were doing a pretty good job at slowing them down though as we were preparing for the assault. Thankfully, due to this would also mean that they would arrive in smaller groups of pirates instead of the entire group coming at us at once, making it much easier to pick them off one by one. However, that does not mean that this was extremely easy, as we were still very outnumbered and coming under heavy fire. At one point, I even had to turn the defensive guns back on from the ship, and this is when I realized that the range isn't all that great, unfortunately. But even without our guns, we managed to take down one of the last remaining pirates, and the others would attempt to flee, and we had won the day. Though I should say the Sentinels really deserve most of the credit, for sure. Either way though, one of the pirates was still alive. Her name was Sam, and she was one hell of a fighter, cook, and miner. So as one would imagine, we put her in the makeshift brig of the ship, began tending to her wounds so that we could actually recruit her into our crew. We also had plenty of weapons and even some drugs from that little skirmish with those pirates. Not that we're going to use them or anything like that really, but we could sell them. Zap Zap also thought it might finally be a good time to tear down these UNSC banners off this ship so we can finally start making it our own. We actually got a little bit of cloth from these, and I wanted to do this symbolic construction of a bedroll from the cloth that we got from them, but of course we didn't get near enough, so we just made a wooden bed for Sam. And now, as our heroes do whatever it is they feel like doing in the background, I thought it might be a good time for us to go ahead and talk about Udo and Zap Zap's stats and traits and stuff like that. that I should have brought up way earlier, but I kind of forgot to. First up, we do have Captain Udo, who was a child spy and grew into a pirate captain. He has a pretty good shooting skill, plant skill, and social skill. Everything else is pretty mediocre for the most part. And he is also an abrasive, steadfast, slow-learning fella. Then up next, of course, we have Zap Zap, who was an industrial orphan who grew to be a pirate doctor of a different crew. He's pretty good at crafting and mining, I guess. Not really much of anything. He's pretty mediocre all around, unfortunately. He is, however, quite optimistic, but also very greedy, as seen among many other pirates. Now, these are just the basics and backgrounds of these characters, but if you're new here, and if you're not new here, you probably already know, of course, but something I always like to do is to let you guys, the audience, come up with some backstories and lore for these characters. So, if that's something you'd like to do, be sure to comment that in the comments section, and I'll look through those and choose from them, and I will try to discuss them every other episode. Thank you for that, and now let's check back in on our protagonist, who appear to be building some type of kitchen and small dining room. A wonderful idea, since we plan on exponentially expanding our crew. The only problem is the highest construction skill is Udo's, which currently sits at a 4, meaning that we can't even build a cooler to freeze our food. Later on into the night, we had a tribute collector stop on by from the Broken Empire, which is a remnant of the Shattered Empire throughout the galaxy. I don't really care, but they did have some nice weapons. The only problem is most of them were bio-coded, and I didn't really want to go to war with any empire at this moment since we're already dealing with the UNSC, so I decided not to blow them up. But I couldn't speak for the Sentinel Force, which apparently absolutely hated them and seems to hate most other factions for whatever reason. I'm sure it's probably a mutual hatred though. Regardless of planetary politics though, we finally got our community kitchen up and going, which was perfect because Captain Udo was just dying to make us some sloppy rice sandwiches. Though it may not look like much, this place will soon become a booming little pirate town. And of course, temporary, as I had mentioned earlier, we're simply here to try and recruit for our crew before we take off back into the stars once again. Though I would also like to try and research into some ship technology ourselves so that we can add on to this one and truly make it ours, but of course make it much larger and much more dangerous. Speaking of which, we went ahead and began building the very first volley of our residential quarters here for our crew. This would actually just serve as a place for Zap Zap as well as Sam, who would have a new prison cell here. It's only fitting that Captain Udo would have his own quarters on the ship, and just as well we don't need any prisoners on there messing with the electronics or destroying anything. We would run into another destructive force though in the form of a large manhunting pack of rhinoceros affected by Scaria. And yes, as much as you've already heard me bitching and moaning about the ship's defensive systems and how I don't plan on using them and blah 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 blah, I do have them turned on trying to kill these rhinoceros, but it wasn't enough, alas. Luckily Zap Zap and Udo weren't afraid to make a last stand against these damn beasts if need be, though we were going to try to run away, and not let them impale us on those massive horns. We tried to run back through the airlocks and into the ship, and thankfully we had managed to close them just in time, keeping the rhinoceros outside. Phew, that was a close one. Thank God we're safe now. Well, kinda. The rhinoceros were attempting to destroy one of our large ship turrets. The problem being with that, we could replace it eventually, but it would probably explode, causing a big hole in the hull and causing them to come through and tear us apart. So we tried popping our heads out and shooting at them, but also that didn't work because they immediately came in the ship. This whole situation was absolutely no bueno. We tried to have the two of them retreat into the captain's quarters. Zap Zap was downed, and I thought for sure that it was all over. But the captain and his sawed-off 12 gauge made a liar out of me. Tending to Zap Zap, the captain had no idea what he would do. Turns out though, a solution would end up finding us in the form of a Covenant squad. At first I was unsure what they were doing here, though I do appreciate their help. But it seems that they were actually investigating our ship since we had only landed about a week or so ago. Either way, we were ecstatic to see them arrive here on the map, and they immediately just began decimating every single rhinoceros that they came into contact with. This is the type of threat that I was talking about earlier. The Covenant are extremely dangerous. We had no interest in engaging with them, so we decided to hide inside until they left, especially since Zap Zap here is injured and also wearing stolen grunt armor from the Covenant Empire. Though as you can see at the moment, the Covenant do not seem to be hostile towards us. They are very volatile, and anyone that gets in the way of their great journey isn't going to make it. And some pirates like us aren't exactly going to the great beyond. I gotta say, say though, I am very glad they showed up when they did because one of our cannons almost bit the dust. And you know, for one, these things aren't cheap, but even if they were, at the moment we don't have the research or even the skills to put one together. We also began repairing the other parts of our ship that was damaged during the little kerfuffle here. We don't want our airlock malfunctioning if we were to need to make maybe an emergency launch back into orbit. Some odd hours later, we ended up having a transport pod crash not too far from our ship. It was a nice young fella by the name of Tiny, and he had one heck of a construction skill, so we decided to capture him and begin recruiting him into our crew as well. Now, as you could see there though, Tiny is incapable of violence, but as long as he's building things for us, we don't really mind. However, if the shit hits the fan, we might just kick him to the curb. Interestingly enough, after we captured him, we also finally recruited Sam into our crew, which was pretty sweet. We had her go into the storage room with the captain and go ahead and equip the LMG rifle that we had, since she has a really good shooting stat and this is the only rifle we currently possess. Those of you with a keen memory probably remember as well that she is quite the little chef, so she's going to be the designated cook for the entire crew, instead of the captain who was giving everyone food poisoning for a moment there. After that, we started working on some more residential housing for crewmates. Even though we currently only have Tiny in our prison to be recruited, I'm sure in the very near future we'll end up having more prisoners who we would like to join us, so might as well get ready, I suppose. We then would have a combat supplier come to us looking to trade, and of course we were happy to do a little bit of bartering with them. We sold them all the drugs that we currently had in storage, as well as a handful of the weapons that we received from previous raids, but truthfully none of the weapons we really had were worth all that much, I'm afraid. We did end up getting a little bit of silver from them though, and about 5 or 6 things of medicine. So all in all, not too shabby. Sam, in her really good animal skill, would also go out and try to retrieve a pet for the captain. A monkey seemed like a fitting companion. Our first attempt completely failed, but our second attempt actually ended up working, and now we have a monkey, probably named, well, Monkey 1, of course. I think it'll be really fun to take this fella back into space with us when we go out and start boarding other vessels and robbing people blind and just, you know, all the good pirate stuff that we're going to do. But of course he needs a name, so please leave your suggestions in the comment section and I'll be sure to look through them. We would end up having a quest where a fella said that he was willing to join us here if we were to take on a raid from the Knuckle Duster lineup, as well as the rebels that are fighting the UNSC. No, we're not going to accept that. I really wanted an extra person, but I have a feeling taking on 2 of those raids would be way too much for us to handle, even if we used our ship's defense systems. Thankfully though, we did end up recruiting Tiny into our ranks not too long after that. As mentioned previously, he can't fight, but at least we have someone to pick up the slack when it comes to construction. Zap Zap was so tickled about this that he ended up throwing a party for everyone. They ended up having it in one of the random bedrooms that we had only recently built. There was not much to do and it was very cramped, but whatever, I guess, as long as they're happy. We then began working on a proper production room, somewhere we could cut up stone chunks into stone blocks, or maybe even sew up some new clothing like some uniforms for all of our pirates. But this would be ever so rudely interrupted when we received a very large raid from the Flood coming from 2 different angles. Large may not be a fitting word, maybe super powerful is even better. There were so many carrier forms, tank forms, and combat forms holding a lot of really strong weapons. We turned on our defense systems and immediately ran inside the ship to the safest place that we could try to get to, just in case they were to breach our hull. Being alerted to this gigantic outbreak of the Flood infection, the sentries were coming out in droves trying to take down as many of them as possible, and I am grateful for this, but the problem is the sentries really suck and immediately die whenever shot by the Flood combat forms or even some of the other types of forms that have ranged attacks. We were trying to pull as much slack as humanly possible with our ship's guns, but alas, this wasn't exactly working out, I'm afraid. Though the sentries have significantly weakened the Flood numbers, they were completely overwhelmed by this point and were even beginning to lose many of the factories that create and or spawn them out of the planet. Looks like it's going to be up to the old pirate crew and old Bessie. That's what we named the ship. Yeah. But old Bessie had quite the thorn in her side at the moment, some of the flood infection forms were beginning to make their way to attack our mighty guns. We couldn't have that, of course, so we came out and we managed to kill it. Although, the issue was the flood were going to continue doing this since our guns were presenting quite the threat to their armada. We tried shooting them down and destroying them, especially the carrier forms, before they made their way over to our defenses, but this didn't exactly work out. We had to bring our pirates back out to manage to kill some of these combat forms before they could take out our guns. After that, all that was really left was some of these carrier forms, and we were sure to try and kill them with the ship's guns and not get too close, because being too close to these infection forms on its own, just being touched, could be a literal death sentence. But with that, we could kind of let our guard down and just relax as the massive raid was finally over. We did end up getting some cargo pods, which funny enough contained uranium chunks. And I say that because uranium is exactly what we need to refuel the guns of the ship. And look, I know this is a space pirate series, but I didn't anticipate having to talk about the ship and these guns this often, so I would like to humbly apologize for that. Now that that's finally over with though, we can start focusing on some proper construction projects, and to do so, of course, we are going to be cutting up plenty of stone chunks. We're going to be using plenty of sandstone and granite to build some very large walls around our very minuscule town. Look, when we first landed here, I thought this ship's defense systems were going to be way too overpowered. I thought, damn, this series is probably going to be boring. I don't even know if I should do this because this ship is going to make it so easy to take down raids. Well, after being here for a while and experiencing many of these threats, I think the complete opposite. I think what this planet is throwing at us is actually going to overwhelm the defenses we currently have. And of course, that is why walls are going to be quite crucial. Our fun time construction time was interrupted though by a power surge, and basically the kitchen caught on fire, but luckily we managed to get that put out. We really need to invest in fuses at some point. We then would begin working on some dirt roads all along these walls to our defensive positions from our little town and the ship. These are actually extremely crucial, mostly because we're actually building this base here in a jungle biome, so there's a lot of thick vegetation making it very hard to get around. Some hours later though, we ended up receiving a distress signal from a falling vessel. We were completely unsure whether or not this was a starship or whatever type of space vessel it was, but one thing was for sure, it appears that pirates had taken this down and caused it to crash. But those poor bastards had no idea. They had been attacked by and were trying to escape one singular hornet. Little did they know they had fallen right into the entire nest. We wasted absolutely no time setting out to try and retrieve anything we could from this falling ship, as every looter and pirate on this planet has no doubt received the exact same signal. And eventually, after a few days of traveling on foot, we arrived. Well, that wasn't exactly what we were expecting. Something tells me that there are probably no survivors, but who knows, maybe we'll find someone laying in all this shitty wreckage. This place is an absolute mess. We gathered up near the wreckage and began looking through all of it together as a team. We did find a few of the crew of the ship, I suppose, and we also found some of their very interesting looking weapons, which we would have Sam pick up and keep on her back until we were ready to leave. I'm sure we'll end up finding more interesting items, such as this uranium here that the captain began putting in his pockets, but we ended up having a raid from a mech hive. Truth be told, I was just surprised it wasn't any of our fellow looters and pirates. We've yet to encounter any of these tin cans in this series thus far. This shouldn't be too bad, as this looks to just be a small recon group. Either way though, Sam was just eager to try out the new railgun weapon that she got from the corpses of the ship's crew. The weapon was okay, I guess, although the problem was we were pretty severely outnumbered by the mechanoids, so we just kind of started popping our heads out and taking pot shots at them, but eventually they decided to come into the wreckage and start attacking us. Zap Zap would fall, and then it was up to Sam and the captain to take on the remaining mechs. As one might imagine, not being out in the open and being able to take cover behind all this wreckage actually made it much easier to take them down, and eventually we had finished off the last remaining one. Now that things were all safe and sound though, we could finally start deconstructing some of the stuff that was in the wreckage, like these cryo sleep pods, which ended up giving us some advanced components. Or perhaps even the hull of the ship itself, which actually ended up giving us plasteel and some normal steel. I began to think though, there is just so much here and this ship is absolutely huge. We're not going to be able to carry all this in one trip by any means, and there's just so many resources that we'd like to have from it. So I decided to claim this crashed ship site for ourselves as a second colony. That way we'll be able to go back and forth as we please, making several different trips carrying the resources back and forth. We may end up building some ships through the SRTS expanded mod, or perhaps some land vehicles through the vanilla vehicles mod. I'm not sure yet. What I am sure about though is traveling on foot there takes a very long time and really isn't worth it, but eventually we did finally make it back home, went straight to our storage room and began dropping off all the goodies that we got, which wasn't really much. Once we had finally gotten settled back in though, after arriving home we started working on some defensive measures, and by that I mean yet another segment of our wall. This part of the wall was a bit smaller, so it didn't take near as long. But as you can see, with that small part of the wall finally finished, we have an entire half of the entire wall finally completed. Good things take time. While still on the topic of defenses, I wanted to mention that I have Zap Zap doing some research, and we're basically just trying to make a beeline straight for gun turrets. Even though we have a very complex and advanced spacecraft, we are pirates, so we know very little about technology, I'm afraid. It was also due to our lack of technological prowess that we didn't know how to build a machining table, so for the moment we're going to have to deal with smashing these sentinels up and trying to get the Forerunner metal from them. Of course, we would fare much better with a machining table, but all in due time. The metal is actually the strongest in the game and also sells really well for a high price. I did, however, want to build Zap Zap a proper research area, so I ended up building him what could best be described as a very small shed with a beautiful floor and beautiful walls, as these are actually fine wooden walls. They cost a little bit more, but they'll keep his mood much higher. Then I noticed that people were beginning to have heat strokes. It was very hot all around the colony, so I wanted to build something to keep everyone nice and cool. Of course, we could do passive coolers, but my god, we're in the space age. Why wouldn't we just build something like this little air conditioner here? Much better. It seems it was a very good decision on my part as well, because shortly thereafter we actually ended up having a heat wave, so things were going to be much hotter. And you know what, sure, that kinda sucks, but you know, for the most part, everything is going quite well. Could things really get any worse? Yes. Yes, they could. Well, it would seem the UNSC has finally become alert of our ship landing here on the planet, and have most likely realized that we're not the research team that was supposed to be embarking on it. As if things couldn't get any worse, they actually had a Spartan among their ranks in the squad as well. We turned on the ship's defense systems to try and kill them, but they were pretty nimble for the most part. That and the fact that they used a bubble shield to protect themselves from any damage. We were severely outgunned, so we immediately started trying to run to make it inside the ship where we could hide from them, killing a few in the process as we were making our way there. There was a little issue that had arose that I hadn't anticipated. The enemies were taking cover behind our buildings just like I expected, but our ship's guns began firing upon them and destroying said buildings because of this. But to be honest with you, at this point I didn't care as long as we managed to kill them. They were about to take our gun out on the right side of the ship. It was under very heavy fire. We would have to act fast if we had any hope of preventing its destruction. With Zap Zap and the captain beginning to bleed out inside the ship, Sam would be about the only one who could actually stand a chance to maybe take a pot shot at some of these enemies, so naturally we sent her out with her new weapon that she found. And funny enough, to my surprise, she was actually really holding her own with it, and it done really well against the Spartan, who eventually would die just as well as the ODST and the Marine. She did succumb to her wounds though and hit the ground. Zap Zap came in to try and take her away as the captain provided cover fire. We may be pirates, but by God, we know how to work as a team. By this point, what few enemies actually remained began running away while firing at our ship in the meantime. I am afraid to say though, we did end up losing one of our main guns on the right side, the one that I was yapping about earlier. Turns out we didn't save it. Now though, with the able-bodied enemies running away, we had two of them here on the ground who were unfortunately unwaveringly loyal to the UNSC. However, we would be able to strip them of their armor, and that way we can equip it for ourselves. It wasn't exactly Mjolnir power armor or any cataphractic armor, anything like that, but a good pirate knows how to make do. Also, I wanted to take a moment and just mention that during the battle, or immediately after the battle, we also had another monkey self-tamed, so we have 2 of them now, which is pretty cool. We also need a name for the second one though, if you guys want to leave that in the comments. But after many trials and tribulations, we still stand. The crew still stands, and as a matter of fact, it is continuing to grow. Though our structures may be destroyed and or damaged, we can always rebuild. We will survive just like a cockroach after an atomic bomb. We will survive and we will inherit this place, thriving in it until we have a large enough crew and ship to live out our wildest dreams in outer space. But my friends, I just want to say, as this episode winds down to an end, I do truly hope that you have enjoyed. I've had a lot of fun starting this series, especially in the first episode here, of course. I have already kind of started on episode 2, of course, as well, but I'm not going to go too awful far in because I'm sure you guys will have some wonderful suggestions for me as well as some advice, and of course I always really appreciate that. Also, real quick, I want to mention that there is a mod list in the video description, as there is for every video that I do that will include mods. People still always ask, so I just want to throw that out there, that if you check the video description you will find a link to that. So enjoy if you want to play along or if you want to use the mods. But thank you guys ever so much for watching. I love you ever so much, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.